Apple is one of the very few foods that almost everyone believes they already understand clearly. You may not know exactly where apples come from. You may not remember when you first ate an apple, but almost certainly you have heard the familiar saying, "An apple a day keeps the doctor away." That sentence is simple, easy to remember, and repeated through many generations. It appears in families, in schools, in seemingly harmless health advice. Gradually, the apple is no longer just a fruit. It becomes a symbol of healthiness, of the right choice, of a lifestyle that cares about the body. We eat apples without thinking much. When we want a snack, when we want to eat healthy, when we want to feel that we are doing something good for ourselves, apples are everywhere. In supermarkets, in lunchboxes, in handbags, in meals labeled as healthy. Precisely because it is so familiar, the apple is rarely questioned. Few people stop to ask, how good is the apple really? Where do the things we believe about apples come from? And how much of that is science? How much is habit passed down without ever being verified? Some beliefs sound so reasonable that no one doubts them. Fruit must be good. Apples must be even better. Natural means safe. Mild sweetness means easy to digest. These thoughts pass through our minds very quickly, so quickly that we do not realize we are believing them, not truly understanding them. But nutrition does not operate based on familiarity. The human body does not respond to sayings passed by word of mouth. And food, no matter how familiar, is still the result of history, of human intervention, and of very specific biological reactions inside the body. The apple is no exception. In the journey of this video, we will not praise the apple as a miracle, nor will we deny its value simply to attract attention. Instead, we will do something more difficult. We will separate the apple from the familiar layer of belief, place it back in its proper position, a food with history, with science, with value, and also with limits. Because when you truly understand something as familiar as the apple, the way you look at all the food around you will also change. Before the apple became a topic of nutrition, it had long existed in the human mind as an image filled with meaning. The apple is not only eaten, it is remembered, repeated, and assigned values that go far beyond a simple fruit. In many Western cultures, the apple is associated with knowledge, with choice, and with the delicate boundary between what is good and what is tempting. Ancient stories, religious imagery, and visual art all repeat the image of the apple as a recognizable symbol, not because it is rare, but because it is familiar, round, and easy to carry meaning. That familiarity makes the apple an ideal representative. When people need an image to speak about health, the apple is chosen. When a fruit is needed to encourage children to eat more, the apple appears again. It does not provoke strong reactions. Not too sour, not too sweet, not too strange. The apple is like a safe compromise between nature and habit. Gradually, the apple steps out of the role of food. It becomes a gentle moral standard. Eating an apple is considered the right choice. Not eating an apple is not criticized, but eating one is always praised. That creates an invisible layer of meaning. That the apple is not only good for the body, but also good for the image we have of ourselves. When a person chooses an apple instead of another snack, they are not only choosing fewer calories or less fat, they are choosing the feeling of being someone who cares about health. And that feeling is comfortable, strong enough to maintain the habit, yet vague enough to hide more important questions. Because in common perception, the apple does not need to be analyzed. It has long been accepted. It belongs to the group of foods considered obviously good, and what is considered obvious is often no longer re-examined. This is a very important point. When a food enters the safe zone of social perception, science is often pushed aside, not because science is wrong, but because no one feels the need to ask science anymore. The apple becomes part of habit, not of understanding, part of belief, not of analysis. And when that happens, the boundary between fact and myth begins to blur. We believe apples are good, but we rarely ask in what sense. Good for whom? Good in what context? and how good? Those questions do not appear because society has answered them for us long ago. But to understand the apple honestly, we need to step back before looking at nutritional components. Before talking about fiber or vitamins, we need to look at the apple as a product of history. Something that has been intervened in, selected, and shaped by humans through many generations. Because the apple we eat today is not the apple of original nature, and our perception of it does not come entirely from science. That is why, to distinguish fact from myth, we need to begin with a very basic question. How did the apple become what it is today? The apple we hold in our hands today is not a random product of nature. It is the result of a very long process in which humans have intervened, selected, and shaped every small characteristic to suit their needs. The earliest wild apples looked and tasted very different from modern apples. They were often smaller, harder, with more seeds, and clearly sour or bitter. For ancient people, that was not a pleasant food, but it was something that could last, could be carried, and could become a source of energy when needed. Very early on, humans began selecting fruits that were less sour, slightly sweeter, slightly easier to eat. At first, this was not science. It was simply survival instinct. People kept seeds from trees that produced more palatable fruit, replanted them, repeated that action through many generations. This process was slow but persistent. Each selection brought the apple closer to human taste. Gradually, unwanted traits disappeared, more palatable traits were preserved, and the apple began to change. As agriculture developed, intervention became more intentional. Humans did not only want apples that were edible, they wanted apples that were beautiful, evenly round, attractive in color, less prone to pests, easy to store, easy to transport. These criteria were not directly related to nutrition, but they determined which apples were propagated and which were eliminated. Over time, thousands of apple varieties appeared, but among them, only a very small portion was chosen for mass cultivation. Not because they were biologically the best, but because they fit best with human systems of production and consumption. What is important to understand here is that every time humans optimized apples for a specific purpose, apples changed another step. Sweeter, less sour, easier to eat, but also meaning that their original natural structure was no longer intact. The apple became a product designed for experience. The experience of eating, the experience of buying, the experience of storing. And when experience is prioritized, other factors may be pushed aside without us realizing it. In modern times, apples continue to be bred to meet new demands. Less browning when cut, longer-lasting crispness, stable sweetness year-round. These characteristics make apples an ideal fruit for modern life, but they also move apples further away from their original natural image. This does not mean apples have become bad, but it shows an important truth. The apple we eat today is the result of many human decisions, not only of nature, and therefore, what we believe about apples needs to be reconsidered in that context. Before saying apples are good or not good, we need to understand how apples were created, because nutrition does not only lie in the ingredient table, it lies in the history that shaped that food. And from here, to distinguish fact from myth, it is time to face the most important question. What does the apple truly provide to the human body? From a scientific perspective, when speaking about apples and nutrition, the first thing to do is not to praise or deny. It is to place the apple back in its proper position, a common fruit, eaten regularly, with very specific contributions to the human body. The apple is not a rich source of vitamins. It does not rank highest in vitamin C. It is not high in vitamin A, and it does not contain remarkable amounts of minerals compared to many other fruits. If we look at apples only through a vitamin chart, many people may feel disappointed, but that is not where the true value of the apple lies. The most important point in the nutritional structure of the apple is fiber, especially a type of soluble fiber called pectin. Pectin does not create a strong immediate sensation. It does not give quick energy. It does not make you feel healthier right after eating, but it acts slowly and deeply on the digestive system. Once inside the body, pectin helps slow the digestion of carbohydrates. This means the sugar in the apple is not absorbed too quickly into the bloodstream. For many people, this is the reason apples do not cause sharp spikes in blood sugar like many sweets do, even though they clearly taste sweet. In addition to fiber, apples contain a group of plant compounds called polyphenols. These compounds do not provide energy, but they play important biological roles. They participate in antioxidant reactions and influence how cells respond to biological stress. It is important to emphasize that polyphenols in apples do not function like medicine. They do not cure disease. They work quietly, accumulating over time through repeated dietary patterns. Therefore, their effects are easily misunderstood or exaggerated. Apples also contain a high percentage of water. This contributes to a feeling of fullness when eaten, even though the calorie content is not high. That feeling of fullness comes not from energy, but from volume and digestion speed. This is one of the reasons apples are often considered a reasonable snack in daily life. However, the apple is not a complete nutritional package. It does not provide sufficient protein. It does not contain essential fats, and it cannot replace a balanced meal. Apples work best when they are part of an overall dietary pattern, not when they are isolated and expected to do more than they are capable of. When viewed from a scientific perspective, the picture becomes clear. The apple is not a superfood, but it is not trivial either. Its value lies in stability, in supporting the digestive system, and in how it interacts with the body when eaten properly and in the right context. Understanding this is the first step in distinguishing fact from myth, because when you know what the apple truly provides, you also begin to recognize which beliefs have gone too far beyond scientific reality. And that is when we need to directly face the most common misunderstandings about apples, the things repeated so often that they become truth in many minds. When a food becomes too familiar and trusted for a long time, misunderstandings around it are almost inevitable. The apple is no exception. In fact, precisely because the apple is considered healthy, many assumptions have formed without verification. One of the most common myths is that apples can replace other nutritional choices. Many people believe that simply eating apples regularly is enough to take care of their health. But this is a very typical misunderstanding. Apples support the body, but they cannot replace dietary diversity. No single fruit can do that. Another myth sounds more reasonable. The sweeter the apple, the more nutritious it is. In reality, sweetness mainly reflects natural sugar content, not overall nutritional value. A sweeter apple does not necessarily contain more fiber or more beneficial compounds. In many cases, the difference lies in the variety and breeding process, not in health benefits. Apple juice is a clear example of confusion between form and essence. Many people see apple juice as a convenient way to eat apples, but when apples are juiced, most of the fiber is removed. The original structure of the food is broken. What remains is mainly water and sugar. The body reacts to apple juice very differently from whole apples, even though they come from the same source. There is also a less discussed myth, but one that has deep impact. The belief that apples are always a safe choice for everyone, in every situation. In reality, the body response to apples depends on many factors: blood sugar status, digestive condition, food combinations, and timing of consumption. Apples are not harmful, but they are not completely neutral as many people assume. These myths do not appear because people intentionally misunderstand. They appear because the apple has been placed in an overly positive position in social perception. When a food is considered good by default, we stop asking questions. And when questions disappear, simplification takes the place of understanding. It is important to emphasize that myths do not make apples worse. Myths only create wrong expectations. When expectations are wrong, usage also becomes wrong, and then disappointment or misunderstanding about nutrition becomes difficult to avoid. To move beyond myths, we do not need to remove apples from the diet. We only need to understand how the body truly reacts to them, not in theory, not through sayings passed by word of mouth, but through specific biological mechanisms, and that is exactly what we will look at next. How apples affect the human body when eaten in real life. Not in simple slogans. When apples enter the body, biological reactions do not follow familiar feelings, but the structure of the food and how it is digested. This explains why the same apple does not affect every person in exactly the same way. The first factor is blood sugar. Apples taste sweet, but the sugar in apples does not act independently. Fiber, especially pectin, slows the absorption of sugar. This helps blood glucose rise more gradually compared to many sweets. However, this effect is clear only when apples are eaten whole. When the structure is broken, as in juice, the body response changes significantly. Next is the digestive system. The fiber in apples not only helps create fullness, it also becomes food for gut bacteria. When fermented in the large intestine, pectin contributes to the production of compounds beneficial for the digestive environment. This effect is not strong immediately, but accumulates over time through consistent eating habits. Apples also influence appetite indirectly. By slowing digestion and creating moderate fullness, apples may help reduce the tendency to overeat in subsequent meals. But this does not happen automatically. It depends on context, what apples are eaten with, when they are eaten, and portion size. For some people, apples may cause bloating or mild discomfort, especially when eaten on an empty stomach or in large amounts. This does not mean apples are unsuitable. It shows that each digestive system reacts differently to the same food. Nutritional science does not operate on a single formula for everyone. Another important point is food combination. When apples are eaten with protein or healthy fats, blood sugar response is often more stable. In contrast, when apples are eaten alone and quickly, the body may handle the sugar differently. That is why how we eat can be as important as what we eat. Apples are not stimulants. They do not create explosive energy. Their impact is foundational, stable, quiet, and dependent on long-term habits. When placed properly within the diet, apples support the body to function more smoothly. When overestimated, apples are easily misunderstood as ineffective. From a biological perspective, apples are not absolutely good or bad. They are a small element within a larger system. Their effectiveness does not come from one serving, but from how they are repeated in the right context. And that context brings us to the next question. In modern life, how are apples being used? And are today common choices still aligned with how the human body functions? In modern life, apples are no longer simply a seasonal fruit. They appear year-round, everywhere, and in many different forms. This convenience has changed how people use apples, sometimes more than we realize. Apples have become a familiar choice in diets labeled as healthy, eat clean, weight loss, midday snacks. They are often chosen because of a feeling of safety, no guilt, no need to think much. But when a food is eaten out of habit rather than understanding, its use can easily drift away from its original purpose. One of the biggest changes is the form of consumption. Whole apples are gradually replaced by more convenient products. Juice, smoothies, dried snacks, energy bars with apple flavor. These products retain the taste, but the original structure of the food is no longer there. And that structure is what determines the biological response of the body. In many families, apples are used as food for children because of their easy taste and healthy image. Meanwhile, for adults, apples often appear during periods of wanting to eat more seriously. But apples are rarely placed in their proper role, a supportive food, not the center of the diet. Apples are also often used as a quick solution, when slightly hungry, when needing to eat quickly, when trying to avoid another food considered unhealthy. In these situations, apples perform their role well. But if apples are used to replace a complete meal, the body will lack essential components that apples cannot provide. One aspect rarely noticed is that the modern eating environment makes people eat apples faster, chew less, pay less attention. This changes how the body processes the food, even though the apple itself has not changed. Fast eating, poor combination, and lack of clear context can reduce the inherent benefits. In current eating trends, apples are sometimes assigned unsuitable roles, at times labeled as too high in sugar, at other times promoted as detox food. These extreme views ignore the balanced nature of the apple. It is not the problem, and it is not the ultimate solution. Apples fit best when they return to their original role, a small part of a diverse diet, a simple choice, without exaggeration. When eaten slowly, eaten whole, and eaten in the right context, apples express their true value. No more, no less. Looking at how apples are used today, we do not only see the story of a fruit, we see how modern humans approach food in general. Faster, more convenient, but also more prone to misunderstanding. And that is why, after going through all the facts and myths, the most important thing is not to judge the apple. It is to learn how to look at familiar food with clearer awareness. After going through history, science, and common misunderstandings, the apple appears not as a miracle, but as a very human food. It is not perfect, but it is not meaningless either. The value of the apple lies in doing its role properly when we place it in the right position. Apples do not cure disease. They do not replace a balanced diet, and they do not protect you from every health issue simply because you eat one every day. But apples are also not something to avoid or excessively doubt. When eaten whole, in the appropriate context, apples support digestion, contribute to blood sugar stability, and provide gentle fullness. These effects are not loud, but they are consistent. The most important reminder apples offer does not lie in the fruit itself. It lies in how we look at familiar food. When something becomes too common, we easily stop questioning. And when we stop questioning, misunderstandings can last a very long time, even when science has moved much further. Fact and myth are not always clearly opposed. They often intertwine. Myths often begin with a piece of truth, then become simplified, repeated, and eventually believed as complete truths. The apple is simply a very clear example of that process. When you understand apples correctly, you do not just change the way you eat a fruit. You change the way you approach food in general. You begin to look at context, method of use, and the real response of the body. Instead of relying on slogans or inherited beliefs, apples do not need to be glorified to have value. They only need to be understood correctly. And when you understand something as familiar as the apple correctly, you will realize that many other foods around you are also waiting to be reconsidered in a similar way. That is the spirit of food knowledge, not searching for sensational claims, not chasing quick promises, but deeply understanding what we eat every day in order to choose more consciously. The story of the apple ends here, but the journey of truly understanding food continues.